Well, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's program, An Evening with the winners of the 2022 John E. Gruber Creative Photography Awards, featuring the photographers of our winning images, Ray Lewis, Dennis Libsy, Christopher May, Chris Walters, and Eric Williams. My name is Haley Page, and I'm the Exhibitions and Events Coordinator at the Center for Railroad Photography and Art, and I'll be moderating tonight's event. The John E. Gruber Creative Photography Awards, named after our founder, is a competitive photography contest that the center has hosted since 2002. It is devoted exclusively to contemporary railroad photography and attracts hundreds of applicants annually from across the world. As Scott mentioned, one of our presenters is even tuning in from Australia. The theme for the 2022 contest was weather effects. With the option to interpret the theme literally, figuratively, or metaphorically, the photographers you'll hear from tonight all produced absolutely stunning photographs that captured both the breathtaking but also sometimes treacherous impacts that weather can create while running a train. Now, before we get to the presenters, however, I'm going to just run through some quick housekeeping information on Zoom webinars controls. As a reminder for returning viewers, as well as those joining us for the first time tonight, we use Zoom webinar for our presentations. This means that audience members do not have access to their personal audio or camera during the event. You can change how you'd like to view your presentation, however, in the top right corner of your Zoom screen under the icon View. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a number of other icons. Please use the chat function for any comments you have during the presentation. By selecting Everyone, you will ensure that everyone can see your comment. And please use the Q&A function to submit any questions you have for our presenters. Following the presentation, we will host a Q&A session. If you have a question at any point throughout the presentation, just post that in the Q&A, not the chat, to ensure that we see it. We will be recording tonight's program, and everything will be made available on our YouTube channel early next week. And I will just go ahead and drop the link to our, Scott's already done it. Here it is, youtube.com/railphotoart. So let me just share my screen real quick. Let's track my Zoom. Here we go. Scott, is that sharing the correct screen?
Yes, that looks good, Haley.
Okay. So tonight's presentation is just one of many that we have hosted since the beginning of our online programming series way back in April 2020. What started as a pivot at the beginning of COVID to keep producing content has turned into a staple component of our community engagement. Thank you to all of our repeat viewers for your continued interest and support. Welcome to all first-time viewers. Make sure to check out all of our past presentations on our YouTube channel, which is the link Scott just dropped in the chat a few seconds ago. Our next presentation will be on Tuesday, October 27th. It's going to be called Shooting the Diesel That Did It. This presentation by Kevin Keefe will take a closer look at our upcoming book, The Diesel That Did It, published by Indiana University Press, and it narrates the debut of the Electric Locomotive Division's FT freight locomotive in 1939 and 1940. And we will set up registration for that later this week, hopefully tomorrow. Also mark your calendar for our next online conference, Virtual Conversations, that'll be on Saturday, November 19th. We will announce the presenter lineup very soon, so again, stay tuned for that on our website and our social media channels. The Center for Railroad Photography and Art is a membership-supported organization. Everything we do stems from our mission to preserve and present significant images of railroading. We do that through online programs like this one, in-person conferences and events, publications like our beautiful quarterly journal, Railroad Heritage, and books. As a quick plug, we just released a new publication called Continuity and Change, The Lure of North American Railroads, about contemporary railroading in North America and the ever-changing relationship between railroads and photography from the 19th century to today. The book is available now, and you can order it on our website at railphoto-art.org/continuity change, and that link is on the screen right now. We also have an archive of over 500,000 images, do an annual awards program, which we're talking about tonight, and put together traveling exhibitions. Members support all of the work we do. If you are a member already, thank you very much. You make literally everything we do possible. If you're not a member, we hope you'll consider joining us, and you can do so on our website at that link that is on the screen right now. It's railphoto-art.org/support. Now, let's get to tonight's programming. We are going to hear from 5 fantastic photographers who will share insights into the making of their winning photographs in this year's weather effects contest. You will hear first from our black and white photographers and secondly from the winners of the color category. Following the interview portion, we will open the floor to questions from the audience. So please feel free to write in your questions in the Q&A as we go along. I'll introduce all of the photographers first, and then we'll go into the interviews, and then we'll get to those audience questions. So first, to introduce the winners of our black and white category. In third place, Dennis Libsy. Dennis has loved both railroads and photography from a young age. He worked his way through NYU Film School and amassed a 34-year career as a camera assistant in the motion picture industry. Now a camera specialist for a large camera retailer and a volunteer conductor at Steamtown, he photographs trains whenever the light is right. In second place, Christopher Walters fell in love with trains at the age of 15 and with photography shortly thereafter. He has worked as a cleaner, map maker, a magazine editor, a publication designer, and now works for Transport for New South Wales in Australia in the realm of business processes and management systems. In first place, Christopher May was born in Aurora, Illinois, and spent nearly 2 decades in Colorado before moving back. Chris has been fascinated with the art of photography, receiving his first camera at the age of 9. He previously served as the photographer in residence at the Sagrada Cristo, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, Art Center in Pueblo, Colorado. Railroading has often been the subject of his photographic work, but he also enjoys landscape photography and has an ongoing project documenting the grain elevators of Colorado, Illinois, and everywhere else he travels. Now to introduce the winners of our color category. In third place, Bob Arnold. Unfortunately, Bob was unable to join us tonight, but he did send in some pre-written responses to the questions that our judges posed to all of our winners tonight, and we'll just take some time to read through those when we get to that part of the program. In second place, Eric Williams. Eric is a professional creative director with a lifelong passion for railroads. He resides alongside the former Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Main Line and travels by train and subway daily to his Manhattan employer. Formerly trained as an industrial designer, his photography draws from his vocation and love of design, art, and narrative to create images that show the contextual landscape of the railroad. Eric's work has been widely published, honored, and exhibited. And in first place for the color category, Ray Lewis was born and raised in Bakersfield, California. He joined the Air Force in 1997 and served as an aircraft electrician for 15 years before switching over to supervisory positions. He retired from the Air Force as their superintendent of the 950 Personnel Aircraft Maintenance Squadron. As a recent retiree, Ray now enjoys model railroading, rail photography, and spending time with his family. All right, so let's get into our interviews. Dennis, you are up first.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Well, Dennis, here is your stunning photograph from Queensboro Plaza Station in New York City. Well, the first question I'm going to ask you is a question I'm going to be asking all of our contestants. And then the second one is a question that was specially crafted for you by the judges of our contest this year. So to start, can you please tell the audience about your photograph and how it expresses the theme of weather effects?
Well, as the judges noted, they were somewhat unsure as to whether or not this was actually weather because it didn't have any precipitation or fog or anything like that. But I'm glad that they did see how I felt about this, because daily or almost daily we have clouds, and these are indicative of our weather patterns. And as train photographers, we're also landscape photographers, so we have to be very cognizant of the sun and of weather conditions. And but also along the way, as I've grown up, I've grown to appreciate clouds. How often did we just lie out in the field and watch the clouds go by and see little dogs or chariots or something like that in the sky? And I've always enjoyed looking at the sky. I live in New York City, where everything is, high. And I was with Steve Barry, good friend. We were on a walkabout through New York City. And we stopped off that very train, and I looked out and I saw this cloud. When I see clouds and clear blue sky, I start thinking Ansel Adams and red filters and stuff. And I I underexposed for the foreground. I exposed for the highlights. I didn't want to lose those delicate little pieces of cloud. And this is the result. And I thought this magnificent storm cloud certainly fit the theme of weather effects, because, you know, in a matter of, I don't know, about 20 minutes, we were soaked to the skin. So that's about it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. And our judges, I mean, they even said here in they started their second question with, the judges thought the tonal values, composition, and interplay of urban sharp-edged buildings and the natural softness of the impending thunderstorm hauntingly beautiful and surreal. Quite a quite a comment. The foreground train is quiet and almost secondary element that draws the two interplays together and completes the story. And that ties in then to the second question that they were interested in, which was, did you envision this image first in color and then distill it to black and white, or did you always see it as being a black and white image?
Well, I alluded a little bit. You know, the process of learning how to photograph is sort of like, you know, learning, looking at a stack of notes for Rachmaninoff or Mozart, and there's a piano, and you have to figure out the way between the two. So I would look at the great photographers like Ansel Adams or Winston Link or David Plowden, and I'd look at this little camera and I'd say, well, how did they do this? How did they match this gulf that like goes between the camera and the ultimate photograph? And so it is a learning process. After a while, you start looking for the light. You start looking for composition, tone, and these things become reflexive, intuitive. Looking at those great photographs, I was wondering, how did they think of these things? How is it possible for a human being to come up with this stuff? And it's taken me, you know, decades and hundreds of thousands of pictures to realize, to come to the other side and realize that it become, by working over and over and doing this, it becomes imbued in you, intuitive inside of you, and it becomes a pure response. And you're not really thinking. Yes, when I walked out of that subway train and it looked, I saw this cloud, and again, as I mentioned, I saw the cloud and the blue sky, which I've known in the past works really well to make a dramatic look with the nice puffy clouds and a black Ansel Adams, the red filter sky. I knew that would possibly happen, but there's a fellow, there's an Australian artist who likes going out to the salt seas of Australia with an enormous 12 by glass mirror, and he makes these art creations out in the desert. And he uses an 8x10 film camera of all things. And he creates these magnificent abstractions out in the Salt Lake deserts of Australia. And the interesting thing he said to me, or about this, was that what he was doing with the camera was collecting data, and that it was in the computer where he found it. And that's a lot with what I do. I'm working very quickly half the time, so I'm just sort of flex. Oh, look, cloud, and I didn't think about it really, and it was in the dark room that I was able to make it. Oh, and that also brings up another one of my favorite points, if I may. As far as musicians or athletes are concerned, normal, regular people say, oh, well, you got to train for years to be an athlete or train to be a musician and so forth. But then they see a photographer take a camera and go like, and then a little while later, they see a fabulous photograph and they go, oh, he didn't do anything. It must be the camera. If I just buy the best camera, I can make fabulous pictures too. They do not consider that in that 500th of a second of exposure, that photographer has applied the decades, the thousands of shots that they've done, all that experience they've applied into that 500th of a second. And that is part of the whole process. You're not at this kind of level that we're working at. You're not even really thinking about it. You're just doing it. You're doing on pure feel. And that's where the magic starts happening. That's when it's just pureness in your creativity. That's when you start getting good stuff. And you can tell I get excited about talking about this. I'll calm down now.
Well, there's some great insights, Dennis. I mean, what a fantastic picture, and what a, to hear the story behind it, just a moment of, I guess, almost like wonder, like, wow, look at that in the distance, and then having that.
Absolutely. You're always looking for that chasing the light. And oh, here's a little Elwood Lawrence story that he'd appreciate. I was walking home from work, walking through Central Park a few years ago, and I was playing this game of chasing the light, where I see beautiful, fabulous light, but it's not hitting anything that's very interesting. So the game is to try and create a photograph out of it that's compelling. So I was at the Bethesda fountain. They have this lovely limestone balustrades and so forth, and greenery and so forth. I'm shooting the sunlight, and at that time, two women were standing close to me and said, "Excuse me, might we borrow your phone? Our phone has died." And I said, "Okay, sure. Here, you can use my phone. It's all right." I figured I could outrun them if they started, but so naturally we started talking, and naturally being me, I started talking about railroad photography. And this was the funny thing. One of the women turned to me and said, "Have you ever heard of a photographer named Richard Steinheimer?" I'm in the middle of Central Park, and this woman's asking me about Richard Steinheimer. Of course, he's greatly revered. I've admired his work for decades. She said, "I used to date him." I love New York. I love it. I love it. Did you like that, Elwood?
For sure, he's really chuckling.
Hopefully Shirley didn't hear that. I don't know. Maybe I did say something bad.
I think Richard had a whole life before him and Shirley.
It's true. This is true. This is true. Okay.
Well, thanks, Dennis. That was a good story.
All righty.
Well, and thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. I look at all of the stuff, all of these fabulous pictures, and I think that I'm in this company is an incredible honor and a great privilege. And I thank the center, and I thank everybody for allowing me to be here.
It's our pleasure, Dennis. Okay, let's move on to our second place winner of our black and white category, Chris Walters.
How you going, Haley? Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you just fine.
Excellent.
How are you doing, Chris? Thank you for tuning in with us. If anyone caught during the intro, we were referencing one of our photographers was tuning in from Australia. That would be Chris. I mean, he's enjoying his morning coffee as we're having this presentation today.
Thank you very much. No, I really appreciate this chance. And also just want to say being on a panel alongside Dennis is a huge, huge thrill because I've been a fan of his for many years.
Well, I'm sure he's very happy to hear that. Yes. Okay, well, Chris, here's your striking shot of an AC-16 Hokkaido on the Zigzag Railway at Clarence Station in South Australia. To start, can you tell the audience about your photograph and how it expresses the theme of weather effects?
Actually, the photo is essentially a happy result from a mistake. So what was going on was I had a few shots planned of this particular train. A bit of context. The date was October 2010, and that was the centenary of the closure of the Great Zigzag west of Sydney, and it's bypassing by a 10-tunnel route, which is still used today. So the tourist railway that now uses, or is about to start using again, that section of track was running a celebratory special up the hill to sort of kind of reenact the final train. What we didn't expect on the day was, because this is mid-October, which is mid-spring here, was that we would encounter a blizzard. So the Blue Mountains, which is where this was taken, may get 1 or 2 snowfalls a year. This past winter, which we've just come out of, they only had 1 day of snow. So, you know, one of our party, who we shall remain nameless, you'll see this later on, was wearing shorts and flip-flops on the day and was caught out by the blizzard. So when we were encountering this weather, we thought, oh, fantastic, throw out all the planned shots. Let's just try and get this right. So we set up on a grade which was about 3%. On a place called Mount Sinai, so completely exposed to the elements, drop off sort of not too far either side. So basically we're copying the wind from all directions. The snow is coming down, but it's going up, it's going sideways, left and right. The shot that I had planned was of the engine coming out of the trees on this grade with the idea that I would compress it and try and get that sort of snow flurry effect. The problem being, as I took the shot, it suddenly sort of occurred to me that it was just too compressed. There was just a little bit too much going on in this shot. I'd picked the wrong side of the line. I had the wrong lens on. So essentially, to capture that moment, because we weren't going to catch this train again before it got to top points, I just quickly adjusted the camera and thought, okay, we're going to pan the wheels as they go past because there's snow bouncing like gravel everywhere. I'll do my best to try and catch that. And that's what this photo is here. The thing of it is, though, I wasn't at the time really happy with it. I can't really put my finger on why, but I put this shot and most of the shots I took that day sort of on the hard drive and left them alone for a very, very long time. And then when the competition came up, I thought, look, I know that day, which was a pretty nuts day for weather. To give you some context, snow in the Blue Mountains in mid-October is kind of like snow in Tehachapi in June. So that's how out there it is. I thought, I'll go and look at the photos from that day. There might be something there. And I looked at this one and thought, okay, look, it's simple, it's effective. I'm a little bit surprised by it because I hadn't seen it in about 10 years. I'll throw it into the mix and see what happens. And sure enough, you guys latched onto it, and I'm now finding myself reevaluating it. So I think you guys are as much to sort of thank for it as I am. That's pretty much my story of that photo.
Yeah, well, I mean that goes ahead and answers what was the judge's question for you as well, which is what was the preparation that went into shot? Was it planned?
None.
Did you think about doing
Actually, that's not true. It was a photo born of desperation and mild panic that I wasn't going to get a shot. I going back to what Dennis was saying before about, you know, that the sort of experience of several hundred thousands of photos sort of kicking in as you're thinking what to do with the light or what to do with the scene. That's what happened here. I tend to be a big fan and advocate of street photography, and I like to, as they say, shoot from the hip with the camera. That kind of kicked in here. And in that, I was really tickled when Dennis brought up the Steinheimer story, because I'm going to name check him as well as kind of my biggest influence. And there's many, many reasons why he's such an important influence for many people on this call and elsewhere. But for me, it's as much because the guy can take a photo anywhere, anytime, and make it sing. You know, stick him in a cupboard with a model train and a torch, he could have, you know, conjured drama, I reckon. He was just that good. And I'm convinced that within that sort of 6'11" frame, or however tall he was, that there was a little street photographer sort of driving a lot of his imagination, because that's kind of what I drew on here. That notion of there's a shot, I just have to try and go on instinct to try and capture it. So on the day, no, there wasn't any preparation other than, as I said, mild panic and, you know, trying to salvage something. But it was, you know, sort of gears in the mind of the sort of shifting into, okay, look, I know I can pan and blur this thing and try and get some motion that way. I can focus in tight. And try and sort of really, you know, ramp up the energy that was going on. I purposely, I suppose, technically overblurred it because I really wanted to get the idea of energy sort of shimmering. So it's not, you know, I think there'd be many who would look at this and go, yeah, it's not technically there, and that's intentional. It's really trying to capture chaos. So as much as there wasn't any preparation sort of consciously. I'd like to think that, you know, the street photographer in me and sort of drawing on sort of the Steinheimers of the world and that kind of inspiration sort of served me well in the moment.
Yeah. And how many other pictures did you take that day then? Did you take a lot trying to make kind of like capture that chaos, as you say, or like how much did you kind of focus on your initial
in this particular moment, there were three. There was the head-on shot I mentioned before. There was this one, and then there was a trailing shot as the train sort of was heading up into. There was a little bit of sunlight trying to come out. But both of those bookend shots, I think, would have been better served with a wider lens and being on the other side of the line. But yeah, look, there was a lot of photos that day in similar conditions. Yeah, it was a weird day because the conditions were just so wonderful for photography, but I didn't really, from looking back, make the most of them as much as I would have liked. I actually have a portrait with my iPhone of my friend who was in thongs and shorts, as I mentioned, that did quite well in a competition about 10 years ago. But that's probably the only other one from this day that I sort of stick in the mind now. And even this one here didn't until I went looking for it. So it's one of those days that sort of I remember more for being there than I do for the photos I brought out of it.
Yeah, well, I think it's fantastic. I love how there's aspects of it that are in so fine of detail, and there's
it was
others
cold. It was cold, you know.
Yeah.
Pain is temporary, art is forever. That was very true that day.
Well, yeah, that is great. Yeah, thank you for sharing. That is, yeah.
My pleasure. I'm very honored.
Thank you, Chris. We're gonna go from one Chris to another. Chris May, are you ready to jump on up on the stage?
Yep, can you hear me?
There you are. Welcome, Chris, and congrats on getting first place in the black and white category.
Thank you so much, Haley, and thank you for the opportunity this evening. It's a lot of fun. There's so many photographers here that I admire their work, so it's truly an honor to be among them.
We're looking at your photograph of an incoming metro train in Elmhurst, Illinois. And as I said, this one won first place in our black and white category. To start, can you tell the audience about this photograph and how it expresses the theme of weather effects?
Yeah, so the date's actually wrong there. It's actually Christmas Eve of 2019, and I was kind of bummed. It was a year we were not forecast to have a white Christmas, and being an odd Chicagoan, I actually do like snow, especially around the holidays. But you know, I love it for its photographic opportunities, and I just think it looks nice. So I actually do like snow, but we were not forecast to get any kind of snow that year. And when I woke up on Christmas Eve, I noticed just this crazy heavy fog, and I told my wife that I want to go out and see what I could find photographically that day, and kind of started roaming around. And I didn't have any definite plans at first when I went out, so I just kind of hit some normal haunts, and I stopped by the Elmhurst station. I work in Elmhurst, and I just got out and started wandering around, and you know, things kind of presented themselves. I was noticing the effects of the lights with the fog, since it was so heavy, and you know, I kind of had hopes that the you know, the headlight and the dish lights would light up in a similar fashion, and I sort of composed for an incoming shot for the train that I knew was inbound Chicago there, and you know, it was a bit of luck. It was a bit of, you know, hope. It was a bit of just love of fog. It's one of my favorite weather situations to shoot in. You know, there's an element to fog that you can hide a lot of stuff, and you don't have that opportunity other times. You know, so it really gives you an opportunity to showcase things that you wouldn't see any other time. And this was a case of that. And I was just thrilled when I got home and started editing this one. And it seemed to really fit with the black and white sort of film noir sort of feel to it.
Definitely. So you just touched on this a little bit, but I'll go ahead and read the question that the judges wrote for you. Should I start? Sometimes great photography is the results of months of careful planning, starting with a concept and waiting for all the elements to align. And other times, great photography is stumbling across a great scene and having the skills to capture it. So they were curious if it was your intention to record this, or if it was a moment of serendipity. And you touched on that a bit, but I don't know. Can you talk a little bit more?
I'd say it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I didn't set out with this exact picture waiting for this moment to capture it, but I think to Dennis's point that he mentioned earlier, the hours and hours and hours that photographers put in and hone their craft, and they learn about light, and they learn about different weather conditions and subjects, and you start putting ideas in your head, and well, maybe if this happens I could make this work. Or so you kind of have a foundation sometimes to build from. And this is a case where I knew the effects of fog, and I like shooting in fog, but there was also an element of serendipity that everything worked out to make the photo the way it is, the silhouetted forms, and the just how dense the fog was that particular morning. So it's an element of being prepared, but it's also an element of just seeing what the railroad and photography gods give you on a given day, and doing the best with it with what you have.
Yeah, I mean, so can you maybe tell us a little bit more about your experience with shooting in fog? I think that's a pretty difficult thing to have mastered, and it's certainly not something that I see too regularly in our collection. I'm curious if you can, as someone, it sounds like it's something that you kind of pursue sometimes. So I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit more about the logistics of shooting in that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes from my background is I do a lot of landscape photography too. I'm not exclusively a railroad photographer, and I think you get in situations in deep woods sometimes where there's just this tangled mess of everything, and it's hard to isolate a subject because there's just so much going on. But when you get a fog, especially a dense fog like this, suddenly everything starts working in layers, and it slowly disappears, and you really have a chance to showcase subjects in a way that you don't have in other times. And even this day, after I got done taking pictures here, I went out to the Morton Arboretum, which is a local Chicagoland arboretum, and I got a couple more portfolio grade images that same morning, just because of the fog and what I could do with the isolating effect that it offers you.
Well, it's stunning. Won first prize in our contest for a reason. So thank you so much for
Thank you
taking
very
the time
much.
to talk a little bit about it with us, and look forward to, I'm sure, getting some questions in the Q&A about it as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Haley.
Thanks, Chris. Now we're going to jump over to our color category, and if I could have Scott join me on stage for this one. We're going to start off with our third place photograph, which is this, absolutely fantastic photo by Bob Arnold, who's, not able to join us tonight, unfortunately, but he was so kind to send in some pre-written responses to our judges' questions. So I'll go ahead and read those off, and Scott will be our stand-in voice. And okay, so
I'll do
Scott,
my best.
Bob, yeah, can you please tell the audience about this photograph and how it expresses the theme of weather effects?
All right, so the graphic quality of this photograph is a result of early morning frost accumulating on the edges of the spikes and screws. By contrast, the mass of each piece has retained more heat from the previous day, and thus stayed too warm overnight to accumulate any frost. An interesting lesson in weather and physics. In a small way, this photo is a visual metaphor for the kinds of environmental influences that impact railroad infrastructure every day and every season. But isn't it ironic that such inherent beauty and visual interest can be found in discarded materials like these spikes and screws?
Okay. And had you previously noted this set of objects and returned a second time, or was this a first time encounter?
Bob wrote that this was strictly a first encounter. It was a frosty October morning. He was out photographing, and during a break between trains, he poked around the large piles of discarded materials from previous track work, and he was drawn to the graphic quality of the frosted edges and the dark, muted earth tones of the rusted metal. The subject was as found and unaltered, and the distinct elements of light and shadow which defined the objects determined his choice of how to frame the photograph. It was just one of those situations that presented itself to him at that moment. And I have to say, it's
like
just, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, sounds like a similar theme for a lot of our photographers tonight.
Yeah, no, the serendipity, but yeah, as so many of them have said so well, the presence of mind and all the training and the years of experience that go into it to help you to see that moment and know how to interpret it with the camera. And I have to say, I'm really personally drawn to this image as well. I tend to favor more sweeping landscapes and night photographs. So I often miss seeing some of these quieter compositions right before me. And I really think Bob did a beautiful job of capturing this one. And I love this little physics lesson there of you know, why it's only the edges of these materials that are frosted. And if you look inside the screws, the bigger material in the middle isn't, just those edges of the threads. And that really, I think, adds to the beauty and the visual appeal of this.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's just one more question that the judges had. Many photographers overlook the visual power of a series of small-scale, intimate elements can deliver. Is this an interest to Bob or an infrequent endeavor?
Well, Bob said that yes, he tends to see and photograph small details as well as the big picture. And in many cases, an intimate detail will speak more directly to a larger concept, right to the heart of the matter. When an image presents itself, you shoot it, no matter the scale. It's a matter of allowing yourself to be open to all the visual possibilities in any situation where the goal is to make a good photograph. Well said, Bob. Thank you.
All right. Jumping ahead then to our second place in the color category, Eric. I'm gonna hop on up.
Hi there.
Hey, Eric. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
So here's your snowy shot from the Broad Street station in New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey. Can you first, to start, can you tell the audience about how this photograph expresses a theme of weather effects?
Well, on multiple aspects, I would say. Obviously, the most obvious thing is that we have snow on the ground. So snow is, weather in the sense that it's something that's really kind of an anomaly around here. So whenever it snows, I grab my camera and I head out every opportunity that I can. So, typically we might have 2 or 3 good dumpings per year. So, I'm out there. So not only is the snow obvious, but the effect that it's having on the railroad is obvious. Here, it's a New Jersey transit platform in Newark Broad Street. It's nice that the sign is there and it's illuminated. And, obviously the railroad is concerned about safety and liability. So their role is to clear the platforms, to have it made, to have the platform safe and accessible and ready for any commuters that are coming. So, and then the third aspect about this photograph is that you see the workers responding to the snow, trying to remove it as quickly as they can. And I really thought that this scene was interesting that when I came across it, because it's not normally something that you see. I'm a New Jersey Transit commuter. I take the train in. Pre-COVID, I was taking it in 5 days a week, but now I just take it in a couple days a week. But typically, like if we get an overnight snow, you show up at the platform in the morning and the snow is gone. So I happened to catch these workers doing this, and this was only one of 2 times that I've actually seen them on the platform. Normally they work in the middle of the night, and they try to hurry, finish their job at one station and then move on to the next station up the line.
Yeah, this is a very unique photo, and very, it really touches on that human element of the force behind railroading. And our judges had a 2-part question for you. One, which you've already answered a bit, was, were you purposely out taking photos this evening, which, he said you were. But one of the aspects that I think our judges really liked was how all of the workers are facing different directions, and how it just really opens up the photo. So when you were making this, was that part of your intention to wait until they were all looking in different directions, or was that just kind of a
well, I think it was kind of, to some degree, it's a lucky accident. To some degree, as Dennis and some of the other photographers alluded to, it's just kind of like being prepared for those moments. As I said initially, to me, like, bad weather makes great photography. Having the elements of weather, it gives you something different than your typical sunny day photograph, which is like, for most of us, it's probably like 99% of our days. Obviously, if you live in some areas, Alaska perhaps, or some of the northern regions, you're exposed to this kind of weather on a more regular basis. But it's interesting because I've always liked this photograph. I took it in 2015, and I went back into my Lightroom library to just sort of recollect the day's events. And I looked at some of my notes, and basically there was a forecast for snow that evening. There was supposed to be a big, I think it was called like a bomb cyclone, where there were intersection of various weather-related events. And the forecast for this evening was for 24 to 36 inches of snow in this area. And it was the first time that either the mayor or the governor of New York was going to shut down the subways because of weather. So I knew that snow was coming that evening. So I took the train in that morning. I brought my camera with me. I figured that I would leave work whenever it was convenient, and it just seemed like a good time to escape the city. So I actually left around 3:30, and I went to Hoboken on the PATH train, which gets me under the Hudson River. I was at Hoboken for about 45 minutes or so, shooting the commuters leaving, and snow was coming down. I got some pretty good shots that I liked there. And then from Hoboken, I took a train to Newark Broad Street Station here, which is on my train line. So I got off here, and I ended up photographing for about 15 minutes. And I did note that the snow removal crew was on my side of the platform, but further down, and it seemed like they were kind of finishing. And I was kind of watching them, but I was really more interested in observing the commuters that were in my immediate vicinity. So I did a lot of photographs of them. And I was kind of engaged with that. And then before I knew it, I saw the crew on the other side. So as the crew was over there, I started taking photographs of them. It was only when I got home and I put my images on the computer when I was able to sort of like look at each shot and kind of edit down the ones that I thought were the most interesting. And what I was looking for is just sort of like the poses and actions of the individual workers, and also the spacing. So I ended up with like 2 out of about a dozen that I thought were pretty good. I was pretty happy with. And then later I ended up kind of selecting this one as sort of like the shot from that evening that I thought was like the best overall shot. Another aspect that I wouldn't have liked earlier on in my photography outings was the yellow vest. When they first came out like a dozen years ago, I know it was longer than that, but when I first really started noticing them, it was just like, I was kind of upset about the whole thing, because it wasn't what I expected out of traditional railroading. I've always been into railroads and trains, but I took a big absence while I was bringing up my kids. So I took like a 20-year absence from railroad photography, and I got back into it about a dozen years ago. So when I got back into it, the whole nature of railroading had changed quite a bit. So at first, I didn't like the yellow vest, whether it was on, a worker here or whether it was on like, an engineer or a conductor. But I've grown to accept them as just part of contemporary railroading. And I think in a scene like this, it actually adds like a little touch of color, and it kind of signifies them as, part of the railroad worker scene. So to end it, it was kind of a lucky event, but I was prepared for the possibility of something like this. And I think that goes back to just sort of like training your mind for opportunities and having your eyes open for various possibilities and experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I do have to say, when you started off with that, because you started with mentioning that there was, a bomb cyclone coming, 24 to 36 inches of predicted snow, and I thought, oh, only a real photographer would hear that and think, let's go photographing.
Yeah, well, exactly. And the funny thing is, after I shot here for about 45 minutes, so along with the New York City subway shutting down at 11 p.m., the governor of New Jersey was also banning cars and rail traffic after 11 p.m. So I knew I had to get home by a certain time. And looking at my data on these shots, I think these were around 5:30, 6 o'clock. Obviously, it gets dark early, in the middle of the winter, and with the snowstorm overhead, it seemed even darker than it probably really was. But when I got home, I jumped in my car and I went down the Gladstone line, and I continued taking photographs until about 10:30 that evening.
There you go. Hope you got some good stuff and you didn't get marooned out there. All right. Well, thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Great. Well, let's get to our last, but certainly not our least interviewee for the evening. Ray, would you like to come on up?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome. And yeah, I'm now displaying what was our first prize in the color category. This is your dramatic shot from the Lower Cascade Bridge near Troy, California. To start, can you tell us about your photograph and how it expresses the theme of weather effects? So it may not be obvious to the audience.
Right. It's Donner Pass. For me, Donner Pass is the epitome of weather. So, like the other photographers say, when the bad weather comes out, I'm trying to get up there and shoot some trains. But the snowplow is a direct result of the impact that the snow has had in the Union Pacific's attempt to keep the railroad open. And those guys work pretty hard when it's dumping up there to keep that going. And the spreader does a good job. Those guys put in some long days and to keep freight and Amtrak moving. And I think this was the only blue sky I had that entire trip, and it was only for about 3 to 4 minutes. So it was a very small window. But yeah, Donner Pass is weather to me.
Yeah, and our to the question that the judges made for you, they opened with, this photograph speaks strongly to the weather theme. The obvious cold, the spray of snow, the color of the train and the plow, and the snow-covered evergreens. And their question was, how did you decide on this site, which represents such a narrow opportunity to get the perfect shot?
Yeah, so obviously this is planned because you can't just jump out of your car and get this photo. It's about a 3 mile snowshoe trek back into this location in the winter. And I've been back here a few, I don't live in California anymore. So, it's a 16-hour car drive. So I don't get a lot of chances, but when I go, I try. I saw this shot maybe 2002. And so I was trying to get back there every year as the weather cooperated. And I never really got what I wanted. I didn't really know exactly what I was looking for. So kind of like what every photographer has said, there is some planning, but this shot was, like I said, there was 3 to 4 minutes of sunshine and backlit, of course. And so I'm sitting there 6 hours. I think I stood in knee-deep snow and snowshoes. So at least I get to stay busy trying to keep warm. But and then you're prepared for a pretty even lighting in a overcast, maybe some snow flurries here and there, and then all of a sudden the train comes around, and those clouds the sun's dancing in and out of the clouds, and making a split-second decision on exposure as the spreader was pushing the snow over. But I'd seen, like I said, I'd tried it a few times before, and I think the first time I didn't have any snow on the trees, so I was definitely going back. The second time it just wasn't as much snow, and every time I was out there it just wasn't as good. So the photo was planned, but the lighting was definitely last minute and kind of spontaneous. So it worked out. I was actually kind of upset just trying to, I'm in a lot of snow, trying to adjust settings and get repositioned and whatnot. But it worked out in the end. And like I said, it's important to know, your camera and how it reacts to the lighting situations. Those guys can probably have a little more background in photography and stuff, probably speak a little more eloquently to it. But I've been, trying to take pictures of trains for a little while. So I think it turned out way better than I thought it was when it happened.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the snow on the trees, and obviously with the plow pushing it off the track, this must have been quite a recent snowfall. So how much did you plan this trip knowing that it had just snowed, or was that just another happy happenstance?
So yeah, planning my days off were, in the military was a little difficult. So I had a pretty good run with luck with Donner Pass and storms. I usually plan a mid to late March trip. And I think from about 2001 to 2009, every time I hit good storms. So the last few years have not worked out well for me, but it had snowed all night. And of course, like I said, this was the only time we didn't have snow. My friend Kevin Dorn was back there with me on that day, as a matter of fact. So I guess he did keep me coming too.
Wow. So do you go snowshoeing to get shots often, or is that just for this
just on
location?
Donner? I'll tell you, I think I was about 18. I was in a hobby shop and I saw a picture. I was a picture of Donner Pass, and I'm like, man, I want to go there. And the guy in the hobby shop was saying, oh, you don't want to go there in the winter. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm going. Unfortunately, the first time I didn't have snowshoes. I did have snowboard boots, but so my feet stayed warm, but I was definitely waist to mid stomach deep in snow. And I learned my lesson real quick to get those snowshoes on. So yeah, I try to get there and get some snowshoeing in and get back there and get some of these locations that are a little harder to get to. Access is, it's a challenge, especially nowadays. They seem to close the highway down a lot quicker. Parking is just non-existent because they'll tow it, because they're plowing roads and whatnot. So it's fun. It's fun. And but I'll tell you what, in a place like that, I love it, but it is nice to go back to Phoenix and get out of the snow once you've been in it for about a week.
Yeah, those are some two pretty opposite climates.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ray. That is stunning.
Thank you for having me again, and I appreciate what you guys do.
Well, all of our presenters, please stick around because we're going to, head into our Q&A now. Let me just put this up on the screen for a few minutes. These are links to all of our photographers' personal websites or Instagram accounts, definitely go and check out their other photography because they have some really, really great stuff. Again, thank you to all of our photographers. I'm sure everyone out there in the audience is giving them a hearty round of applause. We're now going to open the floor to questions. So please go ahead and put those in the Q&A. We'll get through as many of them as we can. And if any of the photographers have questions for each other, we'd love to, use that as a springboard to really start getting into the rest of the Q&A.
Well, I have one for kind of anyone who wants to chime in to get us started here. And first, just let me say thank you all for sharing your incredible work with us. I mean, the awards program is possible because of the great strength of entries we get. And I know everyone who entered this year made our panel of judges' lives very difficult in choosing the winners. But what great selections. And thank you all for sharing your stories. And boy, I'm so impressed by how well each of you speak about your craft. Not only the photographs that you take, but I also begin to speak so well about it. So thank you for sharing that with us. And the question I have for anyone who'd like to answer, as we've really started focusing on a lot of archival work at the center, I, at this point, probably spend more time looking at historic photographs than I do contemporary ones. And I see connections between those. And I'm wondering how historic photographs influence your work, how you connect your contemporary photography to what's gone before, and how these photographs from the past might influence or inspire what you're trying to do today.
I'm happy to go first on that if it's all right, Scott.
Absolutely.
The short answer is absolutely. They inspire. I suppose my photography really took off when I saw a video as a kid on Winston Link that my grandfather recorded off TV on VHS. And from there, I sort of progressed through local photographers like Graham Cotterill and so forth here in Australia, and then to the Ted Bensons and Steinheimers, and sort of then across to Japan and European photographers as well. And I guess it all comes down to wanting to evoke something that sort of speaks to that sort of historical, sort of the romance of railways and the atmosphere of railways. But as I've sort of got older and sort of developed even further, I do enjoy seeing historical photos that have a kind of a modern sense to them. And coming back to Steinheimer, you look at photos he took in the 60s and 70s, and sure, the subject matter is very much of that time, but he had a modern eye. He was using sort of compositions that if you sort of blurred your eyes would fit today. There was a lot to learn there. So look, absolutely, it varies in the way it inspires, but you can't move forward without looking back.
Very good.
Thank you.
There's a quote that I really like, Scott, from Ansel Adams. It's you don't make a photograph just with a camera. You bring to the act of photography all the pictures you have seen, the books you have read, the music you have heard, and the people you have loved. And I think that's true in so many ways. We stand on the shoulder of giants, and what we do today is from what we've seen and what we've learned. And the center really brings to life so much of that, both in the historic work that you guys do and the contemporary stuff. And your yearly contest is a tremendous source of inspiration. And I think when you go out with the camera, you just every part of that becomes part of what you want to do when you're taking pictures.
Yeah, I can add to that as well. But like when I first got back into railroad photography, I think like a lot of people here, it was all about the equipment, like the engines, the cars, the facilities, the infrastructure. But, looking at historical photographs, not only kind of like influence, like how I interpret the railroad scene, but I think like looking at photographs, going back, 100, 150 years, the thing that really sticks out to me is like seeing the context. I really have grown to appreciate, photographers that went wider than closer in. Details are great, but when you get to see the context of the way, a city or a landscape was, like in 1870 and 1900 and even 1950 and even 20 years ago, it's remarkable, how much the railroad infrastructure has changed. And it's just, like I know a lot of us are sad because we go trackside and, those cool signals or depots or whatever are gone now when we're looking for something really interesting to put in the foreground or put adjacent to our train. But, I'm still looking for that. And, I know a lot of that railroad specific infrastructure is gone, but, for me, like the landscape still remains. And I still think it's interesting to photograph the way the railroad intersects with the landscape. And I think that's something that I get out of looking at all of these historical images.
I would like to take it right from here, because with Eric, speaking to I've seen his work for years, of course, and admired it all that time. But recently he showed a bunch of his photographs around Horseshoe Curve. And Eric is an inspiration in that he has been able to surmount this challenge of no railroad infrastructure, and is able to integrate the context, the scenery, and put the railroad within that. And that I found as an inspiration to put the railroad within the scenery that it runs through. And that is the challenge that it's ever present. It's everywhere. Scott, of course, does this in his magnificent things at night with S-curves. And I can't imagine how he does all of that stuff. And so I think the new direction, certainly for me, when I'm trying to find something that's now devoid of signals or depots or personnel, to at least incorporate much more the scenery and the railroad and how it snakes through it. Now, to go on as far as historic is concerned, well, let me tell you, anytime I want to get look at historic photographs, I just look at the stuff I did 50 years ago, because I've been around here a long enough time. But joking aside, in 1956, my father gave me Lucius Beebe's Highball, the book, and I was a goner. And from there on, it was easy stepping stone to all the greats, including, of course, Steinheimer, but also Hastings and Jim Shaughnessy, David Plowden, Mel Patrick, John Gruber, particularly with Mel and John and Howard Pincus. These men were pushing that envelope at the time, where Morgan was trying to do it, trying to find things that were interesting in the diesel age. And those things had an immediacy out of like Life magazine, the news organizations, that kind of freshness that went away from the 3/4 smoking wedgie. And I have a whole shelf, of books of ancient photography and also new photography, and all of those I use constantly as inspiration. I love the old stuff. I have links here on my wall, but I also enjoy, the newer work of Eric and guys like even Mark Turkovich, Joe Stroppel. These are kids that are coming up, and I'm fortunate enough to talk to them, tell them some stuff, and you see they're budding and taking, they think ancient stuff is, 5 years ago. And that is a wonderful thing to see. And yes, I think it's a big, wonderful community. And because of the internet, because of now CRPA, we are able to have like-minded photographers. It was frustrating for me because I couldn't find people who were interested in the photograph. They were interested in the train. That's fine. We're all rail fans. We're here for the train. But we branch off into something else, and judging the value of a photograph. Oh, that's a great train. Well, wait a minute. What about the light? What about the composition? No, I don't care. It's a good train. This is the place where I feel comfortable. This is where I feel at home. And I thank John Gruber and everybody who started this fabulous organization so that we can have incredible evenings like this. I mean, we're talking, I'm getting to talk to a very talented man who's in Australia. We would never know this kind of community before this crazy magic box called the internet. Okay, I tend to get long-winded, but I just want to say thank you very much.
Dennis, next time, let me go first so you can wrap it up.
No, right.
Yeah,
Go right ahead.
I just wanted to, say, because I think I lived in a box for 18 years, the first part of my life, and I was just taking pictures. And in the first book, I think somebody bought it for birthday or something, and it was Schmollinger's Tashpee book. And because it was relative, I lived in Bakersfield, and Tashpee is where I grew up, running back and down the hills there. And then, as I got older, seeing that stuff, I was shooting with a 126 millimeter camera back then, with you get like this much of the locomotive in a picture, and you see some of the images he produced. And then as I got older, I met Dick Dorn, and then of course he introduced me to Steinheimer's work. But it's crazy to think of all the people that have come before us. But one thing that I do know is I think often about what these guys have photographed, and what did they, these guys didn't take much for granted. They were capturing images. And so what are we taking for granted now that we don't, maybe are going to be gone in 20 years? People complain about the GEVOs and, the constant, it's just all the same and whatnot. But I'm in the same boat. I like the landscape and just what the railroad is today, and kind of capture what we see out of our viewfinder.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you all. And I'm going to jump in and just tag onto that because I really want to. And I might lead the witnesses here a little bit, because I'm thinking of a specific example here, and really kind of to tag onto what you just said, Ray. So you were the perfect closer for this. When you're shooting now, I mean, obviously we want to get great photographs that we enjoy in the moment, but how much do you think about shooting for the future, for people looking back at these photographs 10, 20, 50 years from now? And I'm asking that for a very specific reason. I had the privilege of seeing an incredible body of early color photography in Wisconsin, work that was created in the very early 20th century when there were very few viable color processes. These were some autochromes that were some of the first color images published in National Geographic, and they were utterly revolutionary at their time, bringing places like the Grand Canyon to viewers in full color who had never seen it before. Well, looking at these pictures 100 years later, I was actually a little bit disappointed, because it's the Grand Canyon and it looks about the same 100 years ago as it did today. And I wanted to see man-made structures and infrastructure and things that may have changed or evolved or differed more. And this particular photographer did a little bit of that, and those were the photographs I liked the most, but I didn't see very many of those. And I could certainly appreciate the photographs as a product of their time. And yet I looked at them, and there was so much more that could have been shot that wasn't. And I just longed to see color views of buildings and trains and bridges and things from 100 years ago. So I'm just curious as to how that notion might influence how you photograph things today for future audiences.
Absolutely. Happy to go first again if everyone is cool with that. But I'm constantly thinking about sort of the medium of photography and how it will be perceived in the future. And I actually do a lot of work with this little device. Actually, about 90% of my photography is now with an iPhone. And I use things like Hipstamatic and Snapseed to do all of the sort of darkroom work on the phone. And I do that to challenge myself to take something that I hope and strive to be remarkable on a phone. So it kind of challenges me to really use it properly, because, as you know, the best camera is the one you've got on you. But it's also because I want to produce a body of work that sort of is of the times. So, today the sort of go-to photo, which is most of the time around the planet, and a smartphone photo, is sort of been put through a filter, or it's been sort of adjusted sort of digitally in some way to say something about, whether conscious or not, what the photographer's doing. They might just be doing it to make it look cool on Instagram. It often is got no more sort of choice in it than that. but I'm trying to produce a lot of stuff that I will look back in 10, 20 years time and go, okay, that says something about the time, be it a static shot in a museum or an action shot beside a railroad bridge or whatever it is. It's important to me that I take something that says something about where I am at the moment. But more than that, because the technology's there, I can take photos in different ways than I could 5, 10, 20 years ago. So I'm thinking sort of ideas, and I'm increasingly trying to bring motion and sort of that impressionistic sort of style into what I do, so that I could, sort of try to imagine photos, as corny as it might sound, that shouldn't actually be possible. But because the technology is there, they are. It's just your imagination that limits it. The technology is there to do things we can't even imagine now. So absolutely, that's my short answer.
I find it a little, I like what Scott bringing this. I think it's a very valid point. What are we leaving for the people coming after us? This is a good point. I don't think I've ever quite thought of before. While I certainly strive in my own work to make compelling images that give pleasure to the viewer, that I can convey the emotion that I'm feeling in creating these images. I also admit, and so I think that emotion, because emotion stays with us. We human beings who are surrounded by different technology, witness what we're doing right now. But us emotionally, physically, we haven't changed in a millennia. We still love, we still hate, we get happy, we get sad, we get excited, we get depressed, whatever. In the same ways everybody has for thousands of years. So I think emotionally valid things of today work equally well tomorrow. So that point is fine. I think it's very interesting how Scott mentioned that the Grand Canyon, gee, it looks exactly the same today as it did 1,000 years ago and so forth. And what's the point? That is a good point. But to go further, I know Eric is always, I've always been stuck with the steam stuff, and Eric has tried to encourage me, and I know Scott has tried to encourage me to do new stuff and do subways or do something current. And I do that, and I love doing that, but I get stuck in the steam era because I can't help it. I love it. But, it is kind of ironic. I'm trying my best to make it look like it's 1940, but it's, 2022. And what does that say to the people 20 years from now? Why is this man making pictures that are supposed to be 1940 when it's really 2022? And that is an interesting point. And I'll have to think about that in 2 weeks when I'm looking at 2102 coming up, Nesquehoning Hill, bam, 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 bam. I'm sorry, I can't help it.
I'd join you for that if I could, Dennis, believe me.
So, good point, Scott. Good point.
I mean, I guess I'll jump in there. When I got back into railroad photography, like I said, about 15 years ago or so, I just started shooting pretty much everything that was railroad related. And I met a friend who was actually a conductor for the Susquehanna, who had been shooting for about 20 years. And we started going on rail fanning trips together. And he asked me a question. He said, so what do you want to do with your railroad photography? And I hadn't really thought about it. It's just like, hey, I like trains. I'm just shooting pictures. But it started getting me thinking because, because I had missed the previous 20 years and I go back and I look at, oh my God, I was around then. How come I didn't shoot anything? Was I crazy? And so regretful about all of these missed shots that I had. And, as I started to get to know more railroad photographers, I realized that, I'm never going to amass this magnificent historical collection of, images that are more documentary of the railroad, right? So how do I differ myself? What do I want to do? And, I just thought, like the railroad photographers that I considered more as artists, like Link and Steinheimer and Benson. And I've always had like an affinity for black and white photography, and all of them were black and white photographers. So, and back when I was in high school, I had darkroom classes, and learned how to, print my own images. And, I got to see how you could really do a lot with the print, much more than you can. Well, today you can do almost everything, digitally, but 20 years ago, it was really hard to do anything, like in a Chrome, but you could do pretty much anything you wanted to on a print. And you look at a lot of these prints from like Steinheimer or Benson, and you can see how they have processed things differently over the years. And, I felt like they were really interpreting instead of documenting, like they were putting their own personal perspective, their own personal vision into their photography. And, I thought, like, hey, I'm a creative person, like I could do that too, so like that's how I feel like I can, differ myself from, everybody else, especially, people that have, giant collections of traditional, railroad photography. So, I've kind of gravitated more in that direction over the years. And, first of all, I'm just shooting for myself, whether anybody likes it or not, like is kind of immaterial. I mean, I'm certainly appreciative that people do respond to my images, but it's really I'm really shooting for myself first, and kind of just like morphing, my work so that I feel like it has my imprint on it, my finger on it, right? Like nobody else can shoot the way I shoot, hopefully. But I guess that's just sort of my spin, like, will anybody be interested in my work in 20 years from now? Probably not from like a collection point of view, but maybe from an artistic point of view. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as Eric. I kind of, it's what I love to do, and it's nice to get out and see different parts of the country and capture what you see out of your eyes. And for me too, my wife actually does this with me. So I got her hooked on trains because, I think Dennis in the very beginning alluded to landscape photography, but,
how'd you do that, right? How'd you manage that?
But, people don't understand what it's like to shoot a train, a moving object that never comes on time, right? So there's that aspect to it. It's challenging. Maybe I'll leave 5 pictures behind that somebody likes in a few years, but my youngest son also loves it. Maybe he'll grow up and I'll teach him some things and he can do better than me. But for now, just capture what I can capture, and hopefully somebody will glean something out of it here and there. And if not, I had a good time doing it.
Well, I've got a question for you guys. I have obviously had the privilege of working with the Steinheimer collection recently, and one of the moments that really struck me was when Shirley uncovered a bunch of his slides from 1968 when he was working on this centennial project and the impact of the Transcontinental Railroad 100 years later. And he was gravely disappointed with these photos, with these slides. He traveled along the route of the railroad, got out into Nebraska, shot all the small towns, shot along the right-of-way, and captured the slice of life of Americana and the trains that I was blown away by. I mean, Ken Rehor and I were moved to tears as we were looking at these images. And Shirley, his wife, tells us how he was really disappointed with those. He felt like they just were not working. The project wasn't going the way he thought. And here we are, 50 some years later, just losing our minds over this. So, and I recently discovered some photos about 9 years ago that blew me away, that at the time I didn't think much of. And so I'm wondering, do you have some photos or maybe a trip you took that suddenly you rediscover, and it's a jewel that you didn't realize you had at the time, but like Stein says, our photos with time age like a fine wine.
I think very much the photo that I've got in the presentation this morning. I don't know, what time is it? It's that, Bill, because as I said before, I sort of put it away and forgot about it for over a decade. And I think part of what sort of reawoke it is someone else's perspective. I don't think that's necessary all the time, but I think someone else's point of view can sort of get you to look at something you've done in a different light. And that's happened a few times. And it's like a good song, you know. You might not have liked the song, but then you hit it live, and suddenly it's something else completely. Becomes a different beast. But yeah, look, there's many images from my early days that have sort of aged a little bit more progressively than I would have probably accepted at the time. And conversely, there's also photos I took as a kid that I was like, oh, this is amazing. I can't believe I've got this. And now I look back and go, nah, that's just. And look, those might come back into vogue in my mind in a few years' time. But that's the funny thing about being a human being. You know, what you think on Monday is not necessarily what you're going to think on Tuesday. And then Wednesday comes along, and who knows what's going to happen Wednesday. So, yeah, that's definitely, and one of the confounding and beautiful things about being a human being, you change your mind all the time.
Well, you certainly got that right. I mean, I went to, we had an event here in New York City where the Transit Authority ran 5 vintage trains. I went out there with a bunch of friends and we had a good time and so forth. And I looked at my pictures Sunday night and they're all crap as far as I'm concerned. They're worthless. I should just forget it and never do this again. And it was in blue funk and all that sort of stuff. So this brings us to what Elrod just mentioned about Richard and his Centennial project. 2 things. We always seem to come back to Mr. Steinheimer, don't we? But the thing is, 20 years after I got Backward Railroad of the West, which I didn't understand at all when I got it. Wow, I don't get this. I was reading again about how he did the trestle shot at night. And he mentioned, just alludes to many failures. And it's, what did Richard Steinheimer had failures? Because I was so convinced at the time that all of this great work just sprung from their genius, that they'd go click and it was perfect, that there was never any trial or error. It was always perfect. And going on to artistic temperament, I felt in this funk and I thought things were lousy and I don't want to do anything ever again. But then Richard goes out and does tear-producing work that 50 years later, other people see and are moved by. So the artist often is the worst judge of their own work because they're too connected to it, too close to it. I've been blessed, some of you have met her, with my wife, Mel. She is my sounding board. She, in this room, I do stuff on this computer thing and she's over there on the couch and she says, oh, I like that. And I say, you do? And I say, oh, wow, I like this. And she goes, yeah. It is very essential, as what Chris just alluded to, is how we have people outside of ourselves judging the work. So to Scott's thing, what will people think in 20 years? It is, trying to predict the future is a fool's game, but it's fun. But I think that good work, like good artistry that has been handed down to us for thousands of years, good work lives on. And other people will come along to interpret and see what we were doing and enjoy it or think it ridiculous, or how is that different than now? There's so many people today think, wow, you take pictures of trains, what are you, nuts? And I think it's just only something interesting to look at as we move forward.
I think, like you said at the very beginning, Dennis, like a lot of this is just experience, like over, 10, 15, 20, some people here have been shooting for a lot longer, it's like 15, 20 years, like your vision changes and what you see changes. Like I'll go back to some of my early Lightroom catalogs of shots, like rail fan trips that I took 15 years ago. And, immediately, after every trip, I'm sure we all do the same thing. We go through our images, we, 5-star the ones we like, and we might process a few. And, then we're out like the next week, and then we do the same thing, right? So, like I've gone back to some of these old catalogs. I'm like, wow, I barely remember this shot, but obviously I must have thought it was interesting because I took it and I saved it. And I'll go back and I'll reprocess it. And, my processing skills have advanced so much. And obviously our technology has advanced so much, over even like 15 years. So I'll go back, and I'll find an image that I didn't even really, like give it a star, it was nothing. It was a passerby. And now I look at it and just like, wow, how did I miss that? This is an awesome image.
All the time, all the time.
Yeah, Ron, all that works on slides. I ain't touching it.
Oh man, I'll tell you, it is so nice to rescue my slides these days. All those overexposed, underexposed, big scratch. It's like they're all saved.
You can
I got a slide scanner.
Bring them into focus.
Yeah. I can't bring myself into sitting down and scanning all those slides.
Yeah. During the pandemic where I was forced to work from home, I set up 2 scanners, and I just said, and months of work, and I did about 20,000. So I figure I have about half of them done. So I look covetously at Scott's solution of the carousel projector and the why scan when you can shoot. And but of course, it is what it is. I highly recommend it. I scanned everything because I would find shots that, looking at, there's nothing here, it's black. And then I'd scan it and say, oh, look, I managed this underexposed shot of something that doesn't exist anymore. And I can bring it up a little bit. And they become precious artifacts, even the ones that you think are garbage. So I encourage you to, like any huge job, you take a chunk of it, do that. And then when you feel like, do another chunk. And I'm sure Scott and Haley know this really well about dealing with archives and doing collections far better than mere mortals like me. And so I encourage you, though, to start scanning.
Well, there was one comment from John Cowgill. John Cowgill says, I have photos and albums from 30 years ago. Some of them are bad, but I still look at them. And I know I can speak. I have a lot of sentimental favorites that I don't care how bad they are. They're never getting. They're like precious jewels to me. I'm just not showing them to anyone else.
Yeah, I agree. Like I mentioned, all the stuff I took on that 126mm camera it's crap. But my dad had zero interest in trains, and he was a truck driver, gone all the time, and he'd come home for just a little bit, and tired as he could be. And where are we at? We're up in Tehachapi, so he spent every waking moment he could with me on that up on Tehachapi. So definitely good memories to be had, even if the pictures aren't good quality.
Well, thank you guys. How about it, Haley?
Yeah, great question, Alan, and great conversation between all of our photographers, and great events. So thank you to all of you, to presenters, to everyone who wrote in questions, for everyone who tuned in tonight. I know Scott alluded to this earlier, but it really was one of our most competitive contests for this awards program to date. Our judges had over 500 submissions to look through, and they narrowed them down to the 6 pictures that we saw tonight. And I know we have Paul Hammond in the audience tuning in today. The pictures of all of these of this awards program, as well as some of those in the judges also liked category, are currently up on display at the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden. And I believe those will be up through the end of the year. So if you're in the Denver area, definitely go check them out. And the Colorado Railroad Museum, they're good friends of us. They do a lot of other great programming. So definitely go and check out all the stuff that they're doing over there. We hope to announce the theme for next year's conference later this fall. So definitely stay tuned to our social media channels and our website, and we'll announce that in Railroad Heritage in the next few months. As a reminder, Road Heritage is a benefit of membership. We are a member-supported organization. We're entirely funded by the contributions of our members. So if you enjoyed tonight's programming, you want to see more content from us, please consider joining. And thank you to all the people out there who are already members. You really, feel what we're able to do. We are recording tonight's program, and I'll make it available on YouTube. Next week, let me drop that chat to our YouTube channel. Again, in the chat, that's youtube.com/railphotoart. Our next program will be next month. It'll be on Tuesday, October 25th. As I mentioned earlier, that will be an inside look at the forthcoming book, The Diesel That Did It, by Kevin Keith and Martha Miller. That's about the debut of the EMD's FT locomotives in 1939 and 1940. And we'll set up registrations for that very soon. Pre-orders for that book are available now on Amazon. Can drop the link to that chat or to that in the chat as well. It is a long one, mind you. That's the Amazon link. And also mark your calendars for our next online conference, Virtual Conversations, that'll take place on Saturday, November 19th, and we'll get registration set up for that very soon as well, and be looking to announce the lineup for presenters probably in the next 2 weeks or so. So thank you again to all of our presenters, to our audience, and to everyone who participated in this year's program, and for continuing to support us and all the work that we're able to do. And we'll look to hopefully see you guys next month for our next program.
Thanks, Haley.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you so much.
Congratulations, everybody. Thanks for your great work.
Thank
Keep
you,
it up.
Scott.
Congratulations, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks.
Have a great night. Thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.
See ya.